Okay, there we go. Good morning, everybody. Happy 4th of July weekend. Hope everyone is staying as cool as possible right now. So let's see, announcements. We'll have the full moon, even though the full moon 2 days ago, we'll have the full moon chanting service next Sunday, holiday, at 9 o'clock. It'll be on the same Zoom meeting. Let's see. I think that's it for now. There's no real news about the search for new space for us. We're still looking at a couple of spaces, talking to landlords. So hopefully we'll have something to announce soon. When we do, we'll be running a fundraiser to take care of some additional expenses we'll have with the move, which hopefully will include a nice visible sign on West Broad Street looking, so that people actually be able to see that we are Center for Pregnant. So be looking for that, and we'll let you know as it comes along. So go ahead and get started. Body, space, and mind in perfect harmony. Send my heart along with the sound of the bell. May all who listen to it hold mindfulness, sin, and sorrow. And the service begins on page 2 if you have. The fruit acquired by our practice extend to all living beings. Live in the universe connected to all beings. There are those who are in need of physical healing, and they receive the care and medicine. There are those who are in need of mental and emotional healing. They receive the care and medicine. Among this community, we have the following experience. So we hold these thoughts in our minds throughout the coming week. We are aware that our interconnection can extend through space and time and extend our desire for protection to all. But we sought love, compassion, care, and fun. Each carry the seeds of galaxies and stars, planets and beings that came with us. The similarities we share are greater by far than the differences that separate. We are each a unique expression of. May our presentation of it be the best. We each arise from a unique set of causes and give rise to unique events, action, being, art. May our lives be such that those things arising from us grow from our compassionate nature. We do not live in isolation. Our actions affect other beings, and we are affected by the actions. May our actions be done considering how they may affect beings. May we recognize that sometimes the actions of others are done with others. For the Heart Sutra, to alternate number 2 on page 8, practice. All things are insubstantial and fleeting. My body is insubstantial and fleeting. My mind, perceptions, my thoughts, my consciousness, all these are insubstantial. And this is the perfect wisdom. This is the release from suffering. Reside in receptive peace, fixed on nothing, secure in nothing, clinging to nothing, leaving nothing, expecting nothing, excluding nothing, fearing nothing, resisting nothing, isolated from nothing, dependent of, always moving forward, ceaseless flow of the present. This is this moment we are renewed. Realize our unity with the universe and be it. So, So today I want to talk about self and consciousness in Buddhism. The self is a troublesome concept in Buddhism for many. We hear that Buddhism teaches no self, and that always gets us like, what do you mean? I know I'm here. But what exactly does that mean, and how does it apply in our Western life, in our everyday lives? I had a professor in grad school who told us the first day of class, write down 5 words that describe you on index cards. Then he had us throw away the one that was least central to our view of ourselves. Continued to throw away one word at a time until we had only one left. And at that point, he said, throw that one away. Everybody rebelled at that point. Many people rebelled at the very beginning. They couldn't throw away even one. Other people at various times. But we got to the last one, we all rebelled. We said, no, I have to be at least this. This is central to who I am. And all he said was, do you? And then he went on with his class. I didn't realize until much later, as a matter of fact, when I was studying with Eubank Sensei, that this professor, whether he admitted it or not, was a Zen master. What he was teaching us was the Zen concept of anatta, no self, not self. Western philosophy, we usually grasp onto the Cartesian model of the self. This can be represented best by a central circle of the existing self. And this circle is surrounded by other circles. These other circles are our experiences, our relationships. And while they connect to the central self, they don't change it. The self is the self. Any change that's admitted to the self is still seen as only coming from outside. So education, spiritual awakening, etc., are all seen as happening to the central self, and the central self deciding how much to change based on those. Buddhism is very different. In Buddhism, the self should be viewed as a mandala. And the mandala will look somewhat like a spirograph, for those of you old enough to remember spirographs, where it's just looping ovals that all come together in the center to form an open circle. Those looping ovals are our experiences, our relationships, people in our lives. And that central open space is ourself. And you can see by this illustration that if any one of those ovals changes or disappears, the central self is changed. That's why we say in Buddhism, there is no unchanging self. It's also important to remember that these experiences and relationships change and expand through time. So instead of thinking of it as a 2-dimensional mandala, we need to think of it as a 3-dimensional spiraling mandala, in which the self is always changing based on the changes of events the new relationships we have will change all the way from our beginning to our end. And to me, this image helps explain or answer the question, isn't there something to me? Oh, yes, there is. There is that central experience of events, relationships, and action. Pragmatic philosophy in the West illustrates the same thing by using an onion. Dewey and James both use this image of the onion for the self as peeling layers to get to the central self until you've peeled enough that there's nothing left. The onion exists. The self exists. We peel away the relationships and events, and there's nothing there that says, this is the unchanging me. This is also where causality or dependent origination comes into play. It's not that this current self blinks out of existence and is replaced by a future self who has no connection to myself now. Dependent origination tells us that the future self flows out of present self, who in turn flows out of past self, in a continuous flow where each one is dependent on the one before it. This is where karma comes into play. Because what we've done in our past changes those relationships, define us. Alan Watts, the great Western Zen teacher, answered the question of rebirth using the same type of image. He said, why do we think that rebirth has to be about the physical body? We're reborn every moment based on the karma we accumulated in the previous actions. Whether I experience this moment as a God, as a heavenly being, as an animal, as a hell being, depends on what I did in the past. And what I do in this moment determines how I will experience next. So where does consciousness come in? Here's the hard one. Buddhism defines the experience of the self in terms of 5 aggregates. Another one of our lists. We're famous in Buddhism for lists. We have lists of this, we have lists of that. One day somebody's finally going to put together a list of Buddhist lists. I think there are too many to actually do that. I'm not going to undertake it. But 5 aggregates are one of the primary ones. Form, sensation, perception, mental formation, consciousness. Forms are the external things we experience. This zafu that I'm sitting on. Sensations are the sense events of those forms. A lumpy thing that supports my weight or tries to. Perceptions become the recognition of those sensations. Ah, a zafu. Mental formations move us from the realm of non-learned physical events, which the first three are basically defining physical events and our relationship. Mental formations becomes now our learned response to those physical events. So mental formations takes that perception of Zafu and forms judgments. And that judgment can be, I feel at home when I settle onto my Zafu. Or it can also be, oh, that's one of those damn Japanese Buddhist things. I'm not going to have one of those. What do I need with that? I can sit in a chair just fine. Those are mental formations. And then finally, there's consciousness. And this is what some call the self. Although here, the Buddha firmly rejects that. Because when he uses the term anatta, it is often to say, when a person says, is consciousness the self? He will say, consciousness is anatta. Consciousness is not self. Form is not self. Sensation is not self. That's where he usually uses the term not self. But still, we have a tendency to equate them. Consciousness is the amalgamation of the other four aggregates into knowledge of how this form applies in our lives. And I think when the Cartesian model says, I think, therefore I am, consciousness is, in fact, what they're thinking of as self. So how in Buddhism do we look at the interaction between consciousness and the body, specifically brain? Is our consciousness confined here? Buddhism would say yes. Buddhism would say that the consciousness is the action of the brain in the same way that digestion is the activity of digestion. You wouldn't be asking if digestion exists outside or separate from the body, so why ask that about consciousness? It's one of the many Buddhist views. That's the one that I tend to embrace. Buddhist formulation of selflessness or anatta is not the denial of the possibility of a self, but it's more saying that the belief in an unchanging eternal self is not supported by our experience and observation. This in turn means that focusing on an eternal self and its needs take us away from the essential matters of dealing with how we are interconnected and interdependent in this natural world, and how we are affected by and affect this world. Going back to the mandala again, we're actually not even this three-dimensional mandala spiraling through time. And here I want you to change your view of that mandala from being kind of a daisy elongated through space to being a slinky. We're actually a box full of slinkies that somebody has tossed down the stairs. And when all these slinkies get to the bottom of the stairs, each one is still individual, but they're so wrapped up in each other, so interconnected, that you'll never divide them. And believe me, I tried this with two slinkies once, and I could not even get two of them separated, much less a box full of them. This is what we're talking about when we say the interconnection, the interdependence. Now, and here, we're sorry, we might be losing. I hope we're not losing sound for you all. The air just turned on, so sometimes losing the sound. just. This idea is not completely foreign to Western thought. John Donne, the mystical poet, philosopher of Elizabethan England, expressed it perhaps best in his most famous meditation, Meditation 17, Devotions on Emergent Occasions. This is where he said, "No man is an island tired of itself. Every man is a piece of the part of the main. The clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as well as if it were a promontory, as well as any manner of thy friends or of thine own word. Any man's death diminishes because I am involved in time. Therefore never send to know for whom bell tolls for thee." This is exactly the same thing that we're talking about.
Let's see what kind of stuff.
Any loss, any suffering refers to body, refers to us as well. Doesn't matter whether that is a great being or simplest small being, blood or promise. All are connected.
We have to find where it says menu. Okay. Do you see where it says menus at all? Okay, no, okay. So that's the different menus. They do have a kids menu, but it's written too. So let's look you. Let's see the chocolate cake, green chocolate donuts. So that's what they have. The chocolate cake says there's nothing Asian about this.
Thoughts, comments? Thoughts, comments?
Menu, but you normally don't get kids menu, but that's okay. We continue. What do you do? Starters, hot stickers. That's what you want, right? Dumplings. And then that's.
You see how this relates to the situation we find ourselves in today? Much of what we're fighting against now is because of this Western view of the self as an isolated. That's why we have people saying, "I'm not going to wear a mask because it infringes on my rights." That's why we have people saying, "You have to approach this or that in the way that I agree with."
Why we have people saying things like, "I can't help it, that's how I was raised," or "I can't help it, that's just the way I am."
Kelly, I think you went on mute partway through that.
I was thinking people talking about, I can't help it, that's just the way I was raised, with changing social attitudes, and I can't help it, that's just the way I am, that their inappropriate reaction is unchangeable and immutable.
Yeah, and I think that's tied up in both the Cartesian model of self as being, well, it actually, the funny thing is, it isn't in some ways, because those attitudes weren't born in them. So they, by saying this is the way I was raised, you're automatically saying I changed and I had these attitudes, but I'm not going to change anymore. Well, what does change stop at 8 years old? Where do you, and this is what frustrates me with that model of thinking about the self, because it does admit change, but then it stops that change at a certain point. The Buddhist model says no, we change all through life. It doesn't matter how you were raised. Well, it matters because it sets the ground. But you can change that by what you learn, what you do, what you experience through life.
Valid. You know, a lot of religions, one of the central tenets is answering the question of what are you? And so you do it in Christianity for this, and Islam you are this, and then you have it saying you're not. And there's a lot of power in being able to say, I am this. And there's a lot of, it can be quite scary for somebody to say, well, no, you're not actually. Keep trying. Like, what do you mean? But I want to be.
Yeah.
But you're not. So, you know, having to continue to ask yourself the question, what actually am I? It's scary.
Oh, it can be. And we're also removing that, what I often refer to as the eternalist viewpoint of saying that this being that I am is going to continue eternally. Buddhism says, oh, sorry, deal with it. Buddhism at heart, for all that it is a religion or philosophy, we're not going to get into that today, based around the cessation of suffering. It's not a feather bed that you can just lay back in and go, ah, that answers all my questions. No. Buddhism is a bed of nails in many ways that says, okay, you answered that question. Now let's try this one. Let's move on to here and here and here. That's why I said, or I say to my students early in our encounters, don't expect answers from me. All you're going to get from me are questions. That's Buddhism. That's all I've gotten from Buddhism is questions. And I like that, because it forces me to find the answers that work for me. So yeah, I think you're completely right. That I think that's one of the comforts of many other religions is that they say you have the spark of the divine in you. You are God. Great. That feels really good. Now, Buddhism, and I'm reading a really good book right now called Rethinking Religion by a Buddhist author who studied under John Dana Lowry up at the monastery in New York. And she, throughout it, takes a very up and down path about God. Basically, which is a very Buddhist approach. Because Buddhism is not an atheistic religion. Buddhism is an agnostic religion. Buddha refused to answer questions about gods, about eternity, about the eternity of creation. Whenever he was presented with any of those questions, he answered them by saying, "That's not what I'm teaching. What I'm teaching is the cessation of suffering in this life. And that doesn't impinge on dealing with the suffering in your own life. It really makes no difference whether there is an eternal creator God or not. You still have to deal with the life today, one way or another." So Buddhism isn't going to say, "Oh no, you are not a spark of light. Maybe you are." Buddhism simply says that spark of the divine still has to deal with shit the way it is right now, no matter where you're going.
A term that has come up a lot in the news lately, for the countries that are handling the pandemic a little better, is social cohesion. And I think it's interesting how we talk about a contemplative life and looking at within and looking at who we are, but I think we also need to remember to look who we are in relation to the whole, in relation to others. And I think it's easy to get blinders on, to think about what we're doing and what we can do to be better. And you could be thinking about that and miss perfect opportunities right in front of you, to do something. And something that came up in a game show Dave and I were watching was, how did Japanese fans stun the world after the World Cup? And they actually stayed and cleaned the stadium, not just after themselves. They were cleaning up after the other fans, because that's how they look at their society as an obligation. And to us, that's crazy. That that's their fault for leaving their trash there. And so I think it's interesting because I'm grateful to be an American and have freedoms, but I'm beginning to think we do need a little more social cohesion, within America and with the world in general.
I think with that in mind, that people's attachment to the idea of self and not accepting the self helps, or hinders, keeps us from allowing others in and becoming more one with others. That, not wanting to change as well and not letting others influence you, and the people trying to reject that. And it becomes this kind of cycle of pushing people away and then trying to force your own way upon others as well too. And I agree that we could use from much more social cohesion.
Talking, I don't know if it's intentional or not, but the image you gave of the slinkies, how we're about slinkies stay fine, immediately made my brain go to every Sunday we say integration of all beings, right? Well, and we're talking about the concept itself, and I'm really at a loss of prayer for how to say what I'm trying to think. But how do we together the fact that we obviously all exist as separate entities, right? We are all interconnected, but also we don't have any selves. Like, is this a thought puzzle? Am I countering it and rubbing up against it, or is
Am I on to anything here? I don't know.
Yeah, the image of the box of Slinkies was very intentional.
Okay.
Because it is, as I was thinking about how to approach this today, that was an image I just couldn't get out of my mind. And the more I thought about it, the more it really expressed what I see as Buddhist, or as a physical manifestation way of thinking about self. That individual Slinky exists, but it's so bound up with others that you can't really separate it out. So yes, I exist as a separate person from Joe or from you. But at a deeper level, we're so interconnected that even that comment is now going to have an effect on me from now on. It may be, the contribution may be minuscule, but it's there. It can't be denied. That's going to have an effect on the way that I manifest myself.
Make my brain shoot how we solve part going on, especially after 5,000 first. So I know this is just empathy, like in plain terms, but the way we're talking about the interconnection is it's very easy for me to identify, see myself in a handicapped protester that gets maced, right, outside of City Hall. And I can very easily reconfirm, like, oh yeah, we're all much like these and we're connected, seeing that person, but the jackass who maced them, right, like that person is also interconnected. That person is also, and I feel like we come back around to this every 3 months, right?
Yeah.
But like, you know, that person is also a part of the whole Slink thing. It's just a lot more difficult to empathize with, respect, and understand that person than it is the other. And I don't know if there's any way. Do I just have to add it, or is there any tips or tricks guide to how to overcome that disgust? Because the disgust that I feel towards that person is because I recognize, I'll admit that I'm a human being that's capable of getting hopped up on my power and something like that, right? That disgusts me. I don't like that, right? I don't like that. So I don't like that person. Knowing that doesn't make me any more likely to love them, right? Am I making sense?
Yeah, look,
Yeah.
no, you're making a lot of sense. And that's part of the bed of nails that Buddhism is that I was talking about earlier. That it's not just we're interconnected with all people who are doing what we want to do. No, Buddhism is we're interconnected with all beings. And there is a practice that can help with it, and that is the practice of separating person from their actions. And you approached it two different ways in your comment. A couple of times you said, I just can't feel interconnected with that person because of what they did. Well, it's two different things. Person and what they did are two completely separate things. And you again said, I can identify that, yes, I could be hopped up on power and do the same. So the action is irrespective of the individual.
How do we? So this is definitely. How do we? If we separate the action from the person, right? The person is not the abuse of power. Can we still hold accountable for their behavior, or do we just give them a pass all the time?
Definitely.
Yeah, that's the part where
Their actions are, while they are not defined while they are not their actions completely. Within that mandala image, they are partially defined by those actions. And I can say, not only can say, but should say, take a look at those actions and try to resolve them differently. Try to approach them differently. Because that's having a negative effect on you and on the other people. So yeah, we not only can, but should hold people accountable for their actions. At the same time, say those actions are not completely fine or more than, or partially those actions. But I can still hate and work against the actions without hating and standing against you as a person.
Back to kind of the slink analogy. The person is just a mass of slink going down. What you see is one time, like, let's say, like every time the slinky touches a stair or whatever, that's like something happened. So what we're seeing is one part of one slinky touching one part of one thing, and we want to immediately look at that and say, oh well, the whole slinky thing, and what that, or we want to say, oh, it's just completely separate. It's not fair. But it's going to bounce back to slinky. So, but I think the slinky kind of analogy teaches that yes, this event happened. And it was caused by not just one thing, but other slinkies bouncing off it. So there were other causes wrapped up that caused it. And so we need to look at the action and say, yes, the action is bad, but we also need to look at the context of the action and adjust that so that that slinky doesn't bounce off that step.
Just hard. So many causes.
Oh yeah.
It's like it hurts. It hurts when how many causes are. So
That's why I say Buddhism ain't no pillow, it's a bed of nails.
But likely there I mean, people can find like, so there's usually main causes of somebody, you know what I mean? You tease out which specific slinkies and then be able to get rid of them. Maybe you can create the other slink. I don't know if you've ever had slinkies tied together, but they're,
you
know what I
can't.
mean?
No, you can't. Yeah.
Yeah. But you can get them to wrap up a little bit more nicely.
I do love this analogy though. I was talking more about why I'm sure other people realize why I'm so upset with what's going on, and it's kind of self-report, but it's also because now that I've seen this video, someone getting, it's like that thought's gonna stick. So if I try to run away and disconnect from slinkies and go off and live in the woods, right, like Thoreau or something, right, like I'm going to still have those thoughts come up, so I'm still connected. Those slinkies sucks, but also I think
It's also good.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's wrong. It's not.
Anyone else have any thoughts they'd like to share who hasn't yet? Or who has and would like to share more? Okay, well, thank you for your thoughts. Go ahead and finish up with the Bodhisattva vow on page 3. Creations are numberless. I will strive to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I will strive to transform them. Reality is boundless. I will strive to perceive it. The awakened way is unsurpassable. I will strive to embody it. May your thoughts, words, and actions be corrective and encompassing of the pragmatic Buddhist path. May you approach this week with deference and dignity, and may you spread your personal peace to all those you encounter. May all sentient beings have happiness in its causes. May all sentient beings be free of suffering in its causes. May all sentient beings not be separated from sorrowless bliss. May all sentient beings abide in free of bias, attachment, and anger. Remember that the chanting service is next Sunday at 9 a.m. If you have any memorials or special events you would like remembered for this month, please send them to me at my email address. You can respond to the newsletter to get my address easily. And have a good week. Thank you all.
Because I want to be better. That was terrible.